Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to Tales of the Hollow. The Hollow Tales. So this evening is presented by Donna Poirier, prime mover. And I want to thank Bill Grieve for doing the sound tonight and every night. Thanks, Bill. So yes, tonight we have a star-studded cast. We have Allan Hamilton, we have Ben Sutton, and last but by no means least, Bev Toner. So we'll look forward to hearing from all of them in various capacities very, very soon. In the meantime, I would like to start with my hometown tune.
That was well worn.
All the streets are looking kind of dusty. Where is the rain?
Do you remember those?
And the water tower's looking rusty. Ain't that a shame? Seems the whole thing was changing right before your eyes. Still there's always something here you're gonna recognize. In your hometown, in your own town, it's a place you'd like to stay. A memory away, hometown.
He did some for Sutton Customer Services.
All the awnings looking faded out in the sun. And the billboards getting agitated. You know the one. Seems the whole thing was racing. We're standing still. But if you want to find a smiling face, you always will. Hometown, in your own town, it's a place you'd like to stay. Melody away, hometown. Take a stroll down any sidewalk. Hear the crickets sing a song. The neighbors sitting on the porch swing. And fireflies lighting up the lawn. See the kids hanging on the corner all through July, waiting on a little entertainment like who's driving by. Seems the world keeps getting younger, we're just getting old. Still we've got treasure years shining bright as gold. In a hometown, it's your own town. There's a welcome mat and an open door. Sleeping bag rolled out on the floor. There's always room for just one more in my home. It's always nice to see you back in my hometown. Thank you. You're very kind. So it is once again my privilege to introduce to everyone. I'm sure most of you know these two. They have very generously given us these evenings of their time. They are long-standing citizens of Newburgh, Mr. Ben Sutton, Ms. Bev Toner. And we're going to start off tonight by chatting just a little bit about the Academy, which I believe was first instituted here in 1839, and the beautiful Academy we see just up the street was built in 1853. But if Ben, you'd like to start us off with just some of your...
I think Bev has done more research on the actual school or academy, but I said last time, that the academy burned at one time and was rebuilt. And then I thought, I'm going to have to suck that back tonight because I can't prove it. I can't find it anyplace now. But Bev saved the day. She found it in a book that it had, in fact, burned in 1872. Complete destruction in 1872. And it was rebuilt, and I don't know how long it took to rebuild it, but...
No, I couldn't find a date on it either when it reopened.
Yeah.
But it was gutted.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. But students came, apparently, through the government to take their schooling at the academy from, I guess maybe...
From Nassau.
Nassau.
Bahamas Island.
Yeah, Bahamas and different countries to further their education here in Newburgh. And I don't know, I guess it was very famous at that point in time. But it's hard to get much information on it because there's not too many kicking around that went there except Bev and I.
That's not saying.
But we, I went through the academy. I started in the grade 1 class. There was no kindergarten or anything. I started in grade 1, and the first morning, a chum of mine that I played with, he called at the house, and I lived on the corner where Chris lives, and he picked me up about 8:15, and we went to the school, and he took off and played with all his friends out in the yard, and I'm standing there, and I'm a little disappointed I didn't get in on the game, so I came home. And my mother said, "What are you doing home?" And I said, "Well, there was nobody to play with." "Well, did you not go out in the field and look up some guys and play?" And I said, "Well, they all played games, and there was adult games, baseball, beyond me." So she took me back with a scuff of the neck, and that was my first day of school, and that would have been probably in about 1936, 7 maybe, about 37. But that was grade 1. I was in, our teacher was Lula Fluke, and she and her brother Robin, was in the senior room. And in my day, Lula had grades 1, 2, 3, and 4, about 90 students. She had about 45, and Robin had about 45 in grade 5, 6, 7, and 8. Bev tells me that, you tell it.
When I started, I had Lula, and we had grade 1, 2, 3, 4. The girls of 5 and the boys of 5 went over to the senior room. So they left the girls who behaved better to stay with Lula. That's my memory of it anyway.
But it was the brother and sister ran the show for a number of years. I went grade 5, 6 in the senior room with Robin, and then Dorlin Wood took over, and I went grade 7 and 8 with Dorlin Wood. And then when you graduated into high school, you literally graduated upstairs, high school. I built an area of, again, 3 rooms, a big room for grade 9, a lot of kids in grade 9. By grade 10, the room was about half the size because a lot of dropouts. Farm kids, grade 9 was good enough. And then you went into grades 11, 12, and 13, were all in one room. And I could concentrate on what the other kids were doing, but I never could figure out what I should be doing, I guess. So I became a good listener anyway of what the teacher was teaching the other kids. And I can't say much more about it. We had a good athletic program. It was during the war years. We were affiliated with the cadets, Army cadets. And we took part in all their drills and schemes of things. The wintertime we skied. They furnished us with skis and white parkas, and we'd play all Saturday, hiding on each other with skis on and white parkas and hiding in the snow. We were a real camouflaged army at that time. And then someone from the military would come and train us periodically and in different drills. And then in the spring of the year, when graduation rolled around, the cadets would dress in uniform and the girls would all dress in
Navy skirts and white blouse.
Navy skirts, white blouse, and take part to bolster the numbers. And we would all graduate and get whatever trophies you'd won during the year if you were good at racing or any sport that we happened to play. We didn't have a whole lot. We didn't have a gymnasium, of course, and all our activity was outside, recess. It didn't matter if there was 2 feet of snow. You kicked the football and you played out there until you had it packed down just as hard as that table. And that was our recreation until spring. When the mud dried up, we played baseball and soccer and had field days. And I was fortunate enough to be able to take part in most of the field days. And I was a little bit more slim in those days, as you could see from this. This I had in probably grade 8 or 9. And it was with a crest on it from the school. And then in later years, a friend of mine, Dean Baker, was into silk screening and he made me a new one, which is a little more vivid in colors and fits a little better too. Can't say much more about our activities at school, really, unless Bev wants to fill in.
Well, I was going to start with the governor of Nassau wrote to the Minister of Education for a good moral school outside of cities. The minister recommended Newburgh High as second to none in Ontario. The governor sent his 2 sons and 3 other boys from the island to school. But they must have been billeted someplace, but nothing was said about that. In 1920, there was 2 basketball teams that were girls. The senior, they did well. The senior basketball team had my husband's aunt in it, Norma Toner, and the junior team had Evelyn Toner, another aunt, in it. There was also boxing, and there was football. And the boxing, you would know these people, Ben, was George Hunt, Bert Scott, and Dickie Brooks.
Know them all.
Yep.
Played ball with Dickie. And
That's right, that's right. There was also softball, baseball, and hockey. High school students were transferred to Napanee in 1952, right?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Some of the teachers we'll know, some we don't. Lula Fluke, Bird Joyce, Norm Hutchison, Robin Fluke. These, I don't know if you know Ben, Richard Whiteley, and Miss Lockie.
That was after me. He taught some of the younger folks here.
And the public school was Dorlin Wood, George Waldy, and Isabel Ring. She was principal. Dorothy Russell, Louise Millsap, Laura Burgess, and Miss McConkey. And Miss Margaret Mitchell was a teacher off and on for 45 years, and very well thought of. So that that brings it up to about what Ben had to say. So
I want to ask if there was a woodworking shop or home economics or nothing like
No.
that?
Well,
there was a lab.
yeah,
A lab?
there was a lab, but we made birdhouses and,
Yeah,
as a manual training effort.
yeah.
High school had a lab room that we blew up everything we could. And I can still to this day, and should be dead long ago, mercury. We love to get the mercury bottle out and pour out a couple of gobs of that and chase it around the desk until it went down through the cracks in the floor. You lost it. But today, if you did that, I think probably you'd be contaminated for life.
You'd be thrown out.
And how was it heated?
The school's heated. The school's heated with coal with a boiler.
Big
And
radiators
big
along
gold
walls.
rads along the walls that hissed and steamed and snapped and cracked and did all sorts of things, and sometimes didn't work at all. And it was fired by coal. A lot of, when Mr. Shaverstadt bought the building at the end, he dismantled all the old piping in the basement, and I was in on giving him a hand. And I have a 30-foot flagpole in my backyard made from some of the pipe that was originally in the basement of the old school.
Wow. And who delivered the coal?
Horace Clark, a local trucker from
Got
this
it in
area.
Napanee and Vines.
I'm not sure Bev where it came from.
That was-
Napanee maybe, Kingston maybe, I'm not sure.
Usually that's where,
Cars of coal came to the station here too, and the village, the hardware store sold coal to everyone, and they would get a carload of coal in the fall and deliver it around the village to people who could afford coal, and most people burned wood because of the economics of wood in those days. I could always remember the Rogers kids who lived down along the river near where Mrs. Bagan lives today. They'd come up, and you'd always see them about 7:30 in the evening on Saturday evening with an old dog on a great big old sleigh, and they'd come to the hardware and get 100 pounds of coal, a bag of coal, put it on the sleigh, and away they'd go back. That was their source of heat, I guess. But yeah, I don't know much about, I'm getting into the hardware store, and I guess we're supposed to stay with the school. You're a little bit different. One of the little stories that goes along with the hardware store that I can remember as a kid, Dr. Mounts had the brick house where Donna lives. And always medicine came in gallon glass jugs, brown glass jugs. And he would set them on the veranda, and whoever could run the fastest from the school to his back step was custodian of the brown jug. And you took it to the hardware to sell it for a coal oil jug, because they sold coal oil for lamps and etc. And you got maybe 5 cents, and as inflation took over, I think we got 10 cents for those. And I learned to run pretty good.
Done it.
So, Bev, you mentioned they had a basketball team. So where would they practice?
I don't know, probably outside.
So Donna's question was, they had a basketball team,
Yeah.
but we don't know where they would practice.
No, nothing was said about that.
Right.
So I would imagine outside, and probably the games were outside too.
What about music and choirs and instruments or anything like that? Nope. What about cleaning the blackboards and the brushes? And,
oh yeah. Well, yeah, you go outside and bang them on something.
And would people get chosen? You're the blackboard monitor for...
Oh, no, you go and clean the blackboard.
I have two of the, I think they're about 4 by 6 foot slates that came out of the school up at my house. And I made a poster board out of one in my shop. I had a few school buses at one time, and I kept records of stuff on that. And they came out of the school when Mr. Shaverstadt gutted it out. There were desks galore, the old cast iron desks, but I never got one. I always sort of lamented I didn't, but I didn't.
Yes, David.
Was the school first established by Ministry of Education, or was there a religious basis, or what was the first establishment? You said in 1836?
1839.
39, yeah.
Your book tells
So
you.
the question is, I'm just repeating the question. Was there any religious affiliation when the school was established, or was it established by the government as an educational?
No idea.
Nothing in there.
In anything I've read, I don't think there was a particular, it wasn't affiliated with a certain church.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No, I don't
think
think so.
so.
I think the book says Aylesworth initiated it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Aylesworth was a big...
Isaac Brock Aylesworth. There's a name to hang your hat on.
His relatives are on the wall over there.
Ah, okay. And
Is
I
that
think his relatives.
Is that what was at the school and they...
No, this is...
No, there was something, plaque that was at the school, but when he was in the council, he had moved from the school to the town hall. I should have wrote that down. What was that for?
We'll cover that in another...
Okay.
We'll do a whole Aylesworth night.
Yeah.
Shall we move on?
One last question.
Yeah.
What languages were taught at the school?
Languages, Robin Flute taught French, Bird Joyce taught Latin,
Nice.
and I got them all mixed up.
Any other questions? No? Okay, well, thank you, you two. You take a rest, and I would like to introduce our other guest. Allan Hamilton is a Mason with the Union Lodge number 9. He's currently their historian. He's been secretary and worshipful master of the lodge, and Allan has been a Mason for about 20 years. History, a lifelong interest. Allan came to Napanee in 1973 to work for the Lennox and Annington County Board of Education as an audiovisual technician. He was retained as a computer technician in 1985. Allan officially retired in 2007, but continued working for unknown reasons until September 2016. In retirement, he has written articles for the Lennox and Annington Historical Society, which they have posted on their website, so you can check those out. And tonight, Allan will talk about the Prince of Wales Masonic Lodge right here in Newburgh. Ladies and gentlemen, Allan Hamilton.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Donna. It's nice to be here this evening. David's given me some background as to who I am and what I do. I'm going to speak about the Prince of Wales Masonic Lodge number 146 and their first 100 years. Okay. During the annual communication held in London, Ontario on July the 10th, 1861, the Grand Master, whose name was T.D. Harrington, spelled with an A, not WS spelling, granted dispensation for a new lodge to be formed in Newburgh, called Prince of Wales Lodge. It would become number 146. The number was the next number in line of the lodges that had already been created. For example, Union Lodge number 9 was the 9th lodge created. Okay? Or St. John's Lodge in Kingston is number 3. It was the 3rd. Okay? And we'll talk about other numbers, but that gives you a background how those numbers come up. Anyways, it was the 13th lodge in 1861 of all the new lodges. It was one of 13 lodges that began in that year. The lodge would be in the jurisdiction then of Prince Edward District, so it covered, we'll call it all of Lennox and Acton, except we didn't go as high as what we do today, obviously, and all of Prince Edward County or Picton, okay, over there, and some of Hastings County, mainly around Belleville, okay, not higher than that then. The district deputy grand master, that would be a person in charge of the district. His name was Alfred A. Campbell. And on the day of July the 10th, a man by the name of E.H. Coleman was named to be the worshipful master, or the master of the lodge, for Prince of Wales. And they would meet on the Wednesday before the full moon. Interesting way of putting it. However, remember, this is 1861. No street lights. No flashlights. So in order for the Masons to travel to a lodge meeting, they usually tried to make them on an evening where the moon was out because they had a long ways to go. For example, I'll use Union Lodge. When Union Lodge was formed in 1812, some of their people, like Joseph Pringle and his brothers, went from Napanee to Fredericksburg. Fredericksburg being what you and I would call Sandhurst today, except there was no county road number 8 running to the Lennox generating station that went straight down. You had to get across the river on a ferry, travel a whole bunch of miles to the east, bunch of miles to the south, come back to the west, and zigzag all the way down to Fredericksburg. And you're not using a motor car, you might be using a horse or a wagon. So it took a while. In fact, it was might be most of a day to get to lodge meeting. So when you were coming home and lodge meetings started at about, just like your meetings, 7 o'clock, 7:30, and they would go for 2 or 3 hours, sometimes longer, it would be a late night coming home. And you would want to have some light and hope that it was a moon-filled night and not a dark night. So that's why most lodges in those days met at that type of thing, okay, around the full moon. The charter members for Prince of Wales Lodge were Everett H. Coleman, and his mother lodge was Belleville Lodge number 123. John Forsyth Hope, his mother lodge was Union Lodge number 9. William Van Pelt Detler, you might know that name. His mother lodge was Union Lodge number 9. Augustus Hooper, another name that's familiar from around here. His mother lodge was Union Lodge number 9. J.G. Hooper, his mother lodge was the ancient St. John's, which is Kingston. J.G. Shirley, his mother lodge was Union Lodge number 9. Benjamin Canning Davy, does anyone recognize that name? First mayor of Napanee. His family lived originally in Bath, okay, and were quite involved in that community, and he became a lawyer and became the mayor of Napanee, the first mayor of Napanee. So he was from Union Lodge number 9. Simon Oberndorfer, anyone recognize that name? Okay, he was another charter member. And his mother lodge was Columbia Lodge, number 11 of New York. And we'll talk about the last man later on. The District Deputy Grand Master reported in his 1862 report that I have installed the officers of the Prince of Wales Lodge, and judging from the character of those presiding over the lodge, I have no hesitation in saying that it will take a high Masonic stand among the lodges of the district. The worshipful master that was elected that year after being installed was John M. Horsey. He was the worshipful master 1862, 1863, 1864. By 1865, he had been elevated to be a Grand Steward of all of, we'll call it Upper Canada, Ontario today. Jacob Detler was one of the very first members to be initiated into Prince of Wales Lodge number 146, and that occurred on February the 20th, 1861. He would become the Tyler, and that a Tyler is like, in the church, usually you have a greeter at the outside of the church, right? Well, think of a Tyler being somebody like that. Not exactly, but you get that idea. He was outside the door of the lodge during meetings. And he would become the Tyler in 1865 and continue being a member until his passing on the 12th of April, 1900. Following, I have a list here of the officers according to what was printed by the lodge in the Mitchell Company Gazetteer for 1865. In the fire of 1887, all their records were lost up to that point. So about, let's say, 30 some odd years of records were lost. So that would include their member register, all their minutes, and all the, when someone joins joins masonry, they have to sign the bylaws, whether it be an X or whether it be their written name. So in a lot of cases, you look, when I look at the 1812 register that we have in Napanee, I can see the signature of a man who joined in the very early days of lodge. It's quite interesting because from the signature you can tell about the man, you know. And so, or the person, sorry, my apologies, well, the person, because you can see by their signature you can tell a lot, you can see. The worshipful master was in 1865 was J. Forsyth Hope. The past master was this John M. Horsey. He would move from Newburgh into the city of Kingston and became a merchant there for very many years. If you go to Digital Kingston online, you type in Horsey, you'll see all sorts of information about the man and what he did in his businesses. The junior warden was someone named Joseph Kennelly. The senior warden was William Van Pelt Detler. The treasurer was Thomas Scott. That name will come up a little bit later. The chaplain was a Reverend Stephen Miles. Okay, and I would imagine when this building was Methodist, they would have had Stephen Miles as their minister. One of them. The secretary was someone named John McLaren. The senior deacon was Lafayette Scott. Junior deacon Thomas Hinch. Inner guard Joseph Fullerton. The Tyler Jacob Detler we talked about. The director of ceremonies was F.R. Wycott. Stewards were Edward J. Jones, C.W. Miller, and Joseph Hinch. In July of 1866, Prince of Wales Lodge was present at the laying of the cornerstone for the Church of England in Tamworth. The lodge in 1867, under the worshipful master H.M. Wright, initiated 12 members, passed on 9, raised 5. They had 1 member affiliate. They had 3 withdrawals and 1 death. The Prince of Wales Lodge had 42 members. And in comparison, the Grand Lodge of Upper Canada at the time had 184 lodges with a membership of 7,000. Okay? In 1869, brings John Stuart Miller to be initiated, who was the treasurer of Camden Township at the time. He initiated into Prince of Wales Lodge. He would go on to organize Victoria Lodge number 229 in Centerville, followed by organizing Lorne Lodge number 404 in Tamworth. He was the first worshipful master of Centerville in 1870-71, which is about when they started, and the first worshipful master of Lorne Lodge in 1883 to 1886. He's a good example of, I mentioned earlier, there were with people that withdrew. What happened in those days, because we're very old, people here would initiate into a lodge that was here in, we'll say, in southern Lennox and Addington. But they would get the fever to go west, young man, that old saying. And so they would initiate here and then move on. Masonry in those days was a benevolent society, which means that if something happened to the Mason, the lodge would help look after the family, the widow and the family. And so that's why it's called benevolent. The same as the Foresters. Today you know the Foresters as an insurance company. Guess who was before the Foresters Insurance Company? Was the Foresters group of brethren. They were a benevolent society too. And they sold all their memberships to this insurance group. And before that, the benevolent societies were essentially insurance groups, in a way. They would help you. When these men would initiate into a lodge here, and they withdrew, they would get a piece of paper that would say, David Archibald was a member in good standing as of this date within this lodge. And we would like you to, help him. And so he would take this piece of paper, put it in his wallet, and when he decided to settle in Tweed, Kenora, Saskatoon, wherever, anywhere in the world where there was a Masonic lodge, he would show that paper and he would be welcomed as a brother, okay, as a member of and he would affiliate with that particular lodge, wherever he ended up. But it was like in the 1900s and the 1920s, everybody carried, whether you're a man or a woman, you carried a calling card in your pocket, which had your name on it, and it might say something about you, but it had your name, and it was very decorative. Well, it's the same idea. They had this piece of paper that introduced them to the community in which they were going. And I do mean the community, because the Masons were very involved in the community, and so they would be introduced into a church, introduced into the local community, business associations, whatever. So it was that type of thing, okay? From 1874 to 1878, Dr. Archibald King Aylesworth would be the worshipful master. The lodge hall was consecrated on November the 5th, 1878, by the Right Worshipful Brother James Smith, who was the district grand master for Prince Edward Dedi, and a large number of Masons were in attendance at that time. I don't know where the lodge was at that time, anyways, we'll move on. June the 22nd, 1880, was a ceremony of the laying of the cornerstone for the Methodist Episcopal Church in Newburgh, this building. Okay. It was performed by the District Deputy Grand Master T.K. Ross, M.D., for Prince Edward District, and the Brethren of Prince of Wales Lodge number 146. Then on June the 16th, 1881, the ceremony was again performed, this time for the Presbyterian Church in Clark's Mills, Camden East. The ceremony was led by Most Worshipful Brother James A. Henderson, Grand Master, assisted by Worshipful Brother Robert W. Longmore from Newburgh, and Worshipful Brother Archibald King Aylesworth, with the Brethren of Prince of Wales in full attendance. Very Worshipful Brother Archibald King Aylesworth, M.D., would die on May the 8th, 1886, and was subsequently buried with full Masonic honors. And I believe he's up at the top of the hill. September 1887, the Great Fire in the village, which resulted in the horrific loss of 84 buildings, including the leased lodge. And that's all I can tell you about the original lodge. It was a leased building. I have never seen anything mentioned about where this leased building was, but it was leased. The District Deputy Grand Master, who was Fred Welch in 1888, gives an adequate description, and I'll quote here. I deeply regret to report the Prince of Wales Lodge number 146 Newburgh, together with all their furniture, warrant, and jewels, as well as valuable books and records, were destroyed by this terrible conflagration, which laid nearly the whole of the pretty village in ashes. The indescribable ruin and loss consequent upon the raging fire should have deterred less zealous and devoted Masons from attempting to resuscitate the lodge. Not so. However, with the plucky and energetic brethren of 146, so commendable courage that they at once began to hold their monthly meetings in a blacksmith shop. The only place in the fire-smitten village that wasn't destroyed. It was probably Smith's blacksmith shop, located at the south end of the village. I think it still stands today. It was operated by Thomas Smith, who in 1865 was the treasurer of Prince of Wales Lodge. The second story, according to P.J. Stokes in his book Rogues Hollow, says that the second story was a popular recreation center, so it was always available for people to rent, to utilize. There, the Masons discussed the situation and decided to erect the Masonic building, which today graces the principal street on Newburgh, as well as commemorates their enterprise, zeal, and fidelity. And he continues, he says, it's a source of pride and satisfaction to me to be able to say that when the lodgers of the district heard of the heavy calamity which had befallen their brethren at Newburgh, most of them not only expressed their warmest sympathy, but also voluntarily voted and forwarded to them such pecuniary assistance as the state of their respective exchequers justified. While commenting on their liberalness, he wished to specifically note that donations came to lodges from outside the district. For example, St. Andrew's Lodge, number 16 in Toronto, gave $25. Prince Edward Lodge, number 18 in Picton, gave 10. Ionic Lodge, number 25 in Toronto, gave 25. St. John's Lodge, number 75 in Toronto, 25. Ashler Lodge, number 247, Toronto, 25. Zetton Lodge, 326 in Toronto, $25. Tweed Lodge, number 239, Tweed, $5. And he says, I take this opportunity of assuring the brethren of these lodges that the craft in this district highly appreciate their magnanimous action. And it goes on. There would be a Masonic funeral for the Newburgh carriage maker, Henry Finkel, on July the 18th, 1888. He was the son of William Finkel of Bath, and the grandson of the Henry Finkel who owned the tavern in Bath. His funeral card is in the Lennox and Addington Museum and Archives for you to look at. And then on March the 12th, 1889, Thomas Scott, the local blacksmith, died. In subsequent years of the annual reports talk about the fire and gives you an idea of how things are progressing. 1889 report, the lodge is still recovering from the heavy loss sustained by the late fire. 1890, lastly, about 3 years ago, they lost all their furniture, warrants, jewels, as well as valuable books and records by fire, and since then have never recovered. The Deputy Grand Master's statistical report says, follows, but he says here, Prince of Wales Lodge owns the building, and I quote, owns the building, with insurance value of $1,600, and they now have a membership of 51 members. So they've grown. Okay. In 1891, the lodge has erected a fine hall. So they've rebuilt by 1891, in place of the one that burned a few years ago. And when properly furnished, will be a credit and comfort to the members of the lodge. 1893, I regret to learn that they have given a lease to their hall, to a body not connected with masonry. That was, in those days, remember this is late 1800s, that was not something that Masonic lodges did. In fact, Masonic lodges were taken to task if they met in a stable above a tavern, or near it in a tavern, okay? That was inappropriate. The building that they rented was used for other purposes that the Grand Lodge thought was inappropriate. I won't go into what that was, I'm not sure, just they said it wasn't appropriate. So according to their bylaws at the time, it wasn't appropriate, and the lodge was sent a letter dressing them down, telling them to do something different. 1895, May the 16th, Worshipful Master is Milton I. Beaman, MD, and George Anson Aylesworth, the Secretary. A special communication takes place at Napanee Mills. We call it Strathcona. Okay? And this was the laying of the cornerstone for St. Jude's Anglican Church in Strathcona. It's one of the rare cornerstone ceremonies, and I've published for the Lennox and Addington Society. I think there's 13 cornerstones that were laid in the county by the Masons, and I've published all the information. This is one of the ones where it's listed in detail all of the participants, and it also tells you what the scroll was. And for example, in your northeast corner, so let's say it's there, but not all, northeast is not always northeast depending on the building, but let's say it's over here. There, wherever your cornerstone is, it was hollow. And inside of it was placed a copy of the original scroll and other things. And I'll go through here and you can see what the other things were, usually. The Worshipful Master in this case for, the East Special Communication of Grand Lodge was held in the Orange Hall, located in the village of Napanee Mills, in the county of Addington, Thursday, May the 16th, 1895. The Grand Master of the day was R.T. Walton from Kingston. The Deputy Grand Master for this occasion was Right Worshipful Brother R.W. Longmore from Newburgh. The Grand Senior Warden was a brother named Ewart. Worshipful Brother James Aylesworth was the Grand Junior Warden. Reverend Arthur Jarvis, the Grand Chaplain. Okay. Brother Richards, the Grand Treasurer. S.C. Warner, who was one of the names mentioned as a charter member. For here was the Grand Secretary. Worshipful Brother McLaughlin was the Grand Senior Deacon. Robert Guy, Grand Junior Deacon. Very Worshipful Brother George Anson Aylesworth, the Grand Superintendent of Works. The Grand Director of Ceremonies was a Worshipful Brother Peter Johnson. Somebody named Charles Wellbanks was the sword bearer. The organist would be Robert Hope. In those days, Masonic meetings always incorporated lots of music, just like you have in your sanctuary. And if, when they said he was an organist, he was an organist. He actually played it very extensively. There's a man in Napanee called, who was Pruin, and he was at one time the sheriff. Nowhere in everything I read about the man does it mention that he could play. And yet, he was the assistant, I believe the assistant grand organist for the Grand Lodge. This man had talent, obviously, to play at that level, and yet here he is in Napanee. And yet, in everything you read about in his biography, it never mentions that he could play. You know, nothing at all to say that he was a pianist or he could do anything, but he played at the caliber that they would expect. And like I said, there was all sorts of music in those days that accompanied a regular meeting of a Masonic lodge. Robert Henry was the Grand Pursuivant. Milton Beeman, very worshipful, was the Grand Steward. C. Story, L. Stover, worshipful brother Lockridge, and a brother Martin was the Grand Tyler. Together with the masters, past masters, wardens, and brethren hailing from various lodges, a constitutional number of lodges being represented, Grand Lodge was opened in due form at 1 o'clock in the afternoon in the Orange Hall in Napanee Mills. They told them what the purpose of it was laying the foundation stone of St. Jude's Anglican Church. The brethren acting as Grand Lodge officers, having received the necessary directions, Grand Lodge was called off and a procession formed, and they marched under the direction of Worshipful Brother Peter Johnson and marched to where St. Jude's was going to be erected. And they would march in a prescribed order. This lodge goes first, this lodge goes second, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so there was a real thing. And taking their proper positions in the northeast corner of the building. The acting chaplain, which in this case was Miles. Where'd it go? Arthur Jarvis, sorry. Arthur Jarvis. Asked a blessing, and the acting grand superintendent of works read the following scroll. And this is what the scroll would sound like. And I'm not going to read all of it because it gets quite formal and very Old English, okay, in its terms. And it would begin, in the name and in the favor of the great architect of the universe, on the 16th day of May, A.D. 1895, in the 58th year of the reign of our most gracious sovereign, Victoria, and then it describes her, Queen of Great Britain, Ireland, Empress of India, and dependencies in Asia, Europe, Africa, Australia, Dominion of Canada, etc. It lists who the Governor General was, who the Lieutenant Governor of the Province of Ontario was, in here they say the Premier of the Dominion of Canada and the Premier of the Province of Ontario, who the Grand Master was, who the Archbishop of Ontario was. The incumbent in Camden East was Francis D. Woodcock, so that would be the minister, Reverend. John Carson was the warden for Lennox and Addington County at the time. The Reeve of Township of Camden was Atkinson Wild, spelled with an E at the end. And Milton Beeman, M.D., was the worshipful master of the Prince of Wales Lodge. This cornerstone of the Church of St. Jude was laid by Most Worshipful Brother Richard T. Walton, QC, Queen's Counsel, okay, ECL, I forget what that is, past Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Canada and Ontario, assisted by the Grand Lodge officers in the presence of the concourse of brethren and citizens. And sometimes, the number of citizens could number thousands. Even here, there was at least one that I remember of the 13 that I remember recording, where they actually described it as being 1,000 people. And that's a lot. But they would come. Remember, this is on a Thursday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Not on a Saturday, but on a Thursday. The usual ceremonies of the order. The acting Grand Treasurer then deposited the scroll in the cavity of in the stone, together with a box containing Canadian coins and certain newspapers and records of the day. A beautiful silver trowel, suitably inscribed, was presented to the acting Grand Master by the rector of St. Jude's. The Grand Wardens and the Deputy Grand Master applied the implements of their offices to the stone. The implements of their office. Here would be a square, a plumb rule, okay? Mason, tools for a mason, an actual occupational mason, okay? To check to make sure that the stone was level, square on all its corners, okay? Perpendicular and all those things. And they would actually go and do all that work to make sure that this stone was perfect, okay? Because as the cornerstone, your foundation, if it's not perfect, causes the rest of the building to be imperfect. So they did that. Then the Grand Master consecrated the stone with corn, wine, oil. Think back to the Christmas movie called It's a Wonderful Life. And the young man who is, Jimmy Stewart, I believe, is in a co-op, cooperative for insurance and for loans to people. When they open up the subdivision, the new subdivision, he takes to the first person to go into a house 3 things: wine, bread, oil. If you look it up, it's a traditional thing that has been done since the Egyptians to not just necessarily consecrate, but for a new beginning. And it'll tell you what those 3 things do. Okay? And they still work today. The Grand Master then says, well made, truly laid, well proven, true and trusted. And essentially the service is over. The Brethren of Prince of Wales own their own building with a drugstore under the lodge, so they can receive good rent. Only a comparatively small sum remains unpaid on the property. Under Worshipful Brother Thomas J. Winter, the Prince of Wales Worshipful Master, dedicates the lodge room is dedicated on April the 28th, 1909, and just prior to the dedication, the room had been refitted and refurnished. May the 19th, 1911 is the 50th anniversary of the celebration. The last charter member, Simon Oberndorfer, was unable to attend, and all the records that have been destroyed in the 1887 fire have been faithfully rewritten by a Worshipful Brother Fraser. Then on March the 30th, 1914, the Prince of Wales Lodge Room burns again. But they replaced the building with a more beautiful one. The building that you see today is the result. Essentially, I think putting the brick facade in the front and a lot of the stuff at the back, I think, is more of the original. Because from what I read, the fire just mainly consumed the lodge room. Maybe not the rest of the building to any great extent. Dedicating the lodge room on Tuesday, December the 1st, 1914. By 1918, they have 92 members, and the DGM remarks about the lodge are a very fine electrically lighted lodge room. So there you are, in 1918, they've had electricity in their lodge room. Before that, they probably used just like what you have up there. The Brethren redecorate the lodge in 1931 and 1936. The lodge, like many others, has a scarcity of candidates, probably owing to the deficit, to the effect of the Depression, or their limited size and territory. Masonic lodges were given a territory. Prince of Wales is a very limited territory because you have Centerville, you have Tamworth, and you have Napanee. Okay, so they were kind of housed in there to a certain extent. Although they could go down towards, in the south towards Odessa. Okay, down that road. 1945, the Prince of Wales Lodge receives district prizes for the greatest number of blood donor donations and the number of new donors. The 100th anniversary occurs in 1961, And on that occasion, they celebrated or had it with a special church service and a banquet. Okay? During most of the 100 years of existence, Prince of Wales Lodge had 2 secretaries. Okay? Namely George Anson Aylesworth, who served for 17 years from 1892 to 1909, and Adelbert Sexsmith, who in 1967 had completed 45 years, starting in 1922. Amazing dedication of 2 men. I have a list of, at least I have calculated a list of 161 people, and that's nothing. I have not looked at the members register of that of Prince of Wales Lodge, but from my sources, I can tell they've had about 161 members. If you're interested in somebody, I can tell you. They've had a number of Grand Lodge officers over the years. 1865 was John M. Horsey. 1877, Archibald King Aylesworth as a Grand Steward. 1879, Dr. Milton I. Beeman, the Grand Pursuivant. Pursuivant means follower of the Grand Master, so he would go around and make sure everything was being done properly. 1886, Robert W. Longmore was the District Grand Master of Prince Edward District. 1891, George Anson Aylesworth, Grand Steward. 1896, George Anson Aylesworth becomes the District Deputy Grand Master of Frontenac District, which is Kingston and what we have today. That's when that started. 1911, David Ashton Nesbitt, he becomes the District Deputy Grand Master, Frontenac District. He was a teacher at the Academy. He became one of the very early superintendents of schools, public schools in the county of Lennox and Addington, or Lennox, I think, not Addington, but Lennox. 1977, Basil B. Balance, District Deputy Grand Master. 1995, Gordon Riddich, District Deputy Grand Master. 1996, Gordon Small, Grand Steward. 2000, Sid Woods, Grand Steward. 2007, Marvin Switzer, District Deputy Grand Master. 2010, Douglas Scott, Grand Steward. 2022, Ian Troyer, District Deputy Grand Master of Frontenac District. I can tell you very quickly about Simon Oberndorfer. He's a little bit unique. Remember, he was one of the last charter members. He was born in Baden, Germany in 1828, arrived in Kingston via New York in 1857 with his wife, Silly. The Gazetteer for 1865 says he was a jeweler, a watchmaker, a cigar and tobacco dealer on Princess Street near Bagot. He would advertise his businesses regular in the regular newspapers in Kingston, emphasizing fresh, handmade cigars. You can see samples of his advertisements in the digital Kingston website. He's listed in other books as a merchant and a cigar maker. He established his factory in Kingston in 1857. According to the report on the Royal Commission of Relations of Labor and Capital, 1889, he is called as a witness when they convened in Kingston on January the 31st, 1888. And it's recorded that there were 2 cigar factories in Kingston. He employed 20 to 25 hands. 6 of them were journeymen over the age of 20 years who earned $12 to $15 a week. He also employed 5 to 6 boys over 16 years of age and 10 girls over 14. His lowest wage was $2 per week. He employed 2 salesmen who traveled between Kingston, Ottawa, North Bay, and Port Perry. And he had been, by 1888, he had been in business 25 years. He would also become one of the main founders of the Orthodox Beth Israel Congregation of Kingston in 1908. The other man I want to talk to you about is, and this is George Anson Aylesworth. He was the son of John Bell and Catherine Bristol Aylesworth, born in January the 25th, 1857, just north of the village. He would marry Ida Louise Hope in 1890. And here's his obituary that is published in the Grand Proceedings in 1940. A sincere tribute to the memory of George Anson Aylesworth, one of Newburgh's oldest and most highly esteemed residents, who passed away in the Kingston General Hospital November 30th, 1939. When his funeral service was held from his residence in Newburgh, the Masonic fraternity of which he had been a member since 1884 was largely represented, and in addition to the presence of W.S. Harrington, past Grand Master, there were present William Chapman, Kingston Deputy Grand Master, and 9 District Deputy Grand Masters. The Masonic brethren gathered in the lodge room and then marched to Ellsworth's house. The services at the house and at the cemetery were conducted by Reverend E.F. Swain, he's on the black wall back there, of the United Church, of which Brother Ellsworth had been a lifelong member, assisted by Reverend Canon R.W. Spencer, rector of St. John's Church. Following the regular service, the Masons held their service conducted by Most Worshipful Brother W.S. Harrington and Right Worshipful Brother William Chapman. There were a wealth of floral tributes. A Mason for nearly 56 years. A few years after becoming a member, he was elected as the Worshipful Master of the Newburgh Lodge. He later became the District Deputy Grand Master. He was the Secretary of the Lodge until 1926. Then he became Treasurer, or 1909, and then became Treasurer in 1926. He was a public speaker, a gifted public speaker, and people were always glad to hear him speak. And he spoke on many different topics. He was noted for having one of the finest libraries in the county. He was born on a farm north of Newburgh. For 5 years, he was the Reeve of Newburgh. He turned down being the warden of the county. A man of intellectual attainments and well-liked by a large circle of friends. He, besides being Masonically involved, he was the librarian at Newburgh Academy. He was also the Secretary-Treasurer of the Ontario Educational Association of Trustees Department, 1894 to 1898. And he was the Treasurer, mentioned that. He's buried in the Newburgh Cemetery at the top of the hill. And with that, I'll stop. My apologies. I hope I've given you some information about this lodge. I remember going to it at one time in my career, but other than that, I don't remember a lot. I know there's more stories to be told about it, but I'm in the midst of speaking with the Prince of Wales Lodge and their secretary and trying to, after they've been moving around so much, because they now meet in Harrowsmith, the memorabilia and things just aren't where they used to be, so it's hard to put their hands on it, but there's a couple of things I remember that I've asked questions about, and they're trying to look for them for me and find out what's going on. Yes?
Do you know when it was closed?
When it hasn't closed, it's still a function. The lodge operates today out of Harrowsmith. It operated up until, I'm going to say, if not during COVID, just before COVID, it left where we meet on Bridge Street in Napanee, and they moved to Harrowsmith. But the building here, they closed in, I'm going to say 10 years, maybe 15 years. Yeah, I think so, okay? It was in and around there. Like I said, I remember in my 20-some years, I remember going to the building up on the second floor and being in the lodge room, but I don't know. It was just one occasion. I was busy with other things and trying to take it all in and understand it. I was relatively new to Masonry at the time, so I don't remember a lot about it. But I think in about that time, it became, as numbers dwindle, costs still go up. And all lodges, whether you be a Masonic lodge, a Forester's lodge, or whatever type of society, that's what happens today. Members dwindle because of the way society is, but the costs still go up. It's mainly the cost of insurance. Okay, that's the killer and every lodge and every organization fights that battle all the time. Okay? Are there any, yes?
Yes, I'm curious, is the society a secret society? Is it a secret society?
No, it's the most unsecret society in the world. If you ask a question, a Mason will give you the answer. You have to ask the question. If you want, and there are women Masonic lodges today, okay? If you want to be a Mason, you have to ask the question of somebody who you think is a Mason. And they will give you a response, and then you can make an application. But it has to be initiated by the person that wishes to become. It's not solicited or advertised to belong to a Masonic lodge. And that's part of the reason why it's secretive. It's called secretive, but it isn't. You ask any question, and a Mason will answer the question. Or I will, I know I will. Okay, and I'm a past worshipful master, and all those things and rights and things that I was told to do and I've done, there's nothing to say that I can't tell you. Okay? There are certain, how do you want to say, phrases or something like that are like a secret password or something like that. Yes, I'm not going to tell you that. But
Oh, come on.
but, you know, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't talk about what's here. And that's part of the thing. Any other questions? Yes?
Did any religion join?
Yes. Sorry, I'm not, the question was, may any religion join? Yes. They may. When you're initiated into a lodge, you have a holy book placed in front of you. It's the holy book of your choice. So if you're Jewish, it's your holy book. If you're a Muslim, it's your holy book. It's a holy book. Now, in Upper Canada at the time, and the holy book would have been a Bible, okay? Like what you and I would remember. However, I read to you tonight about one of the charter members of this lodge here, Simon Orbendorfer. Obviously he was Jewish, and yet he was a member of this lodge, a charter member of this lodge, which is an important term, because he was one of the founding people that wanted to start a lodge in this community. Okay? But yes, you may. Religion doesn't matter. Yes?
I wonder if Ben or Bev remember anything about the building, that it still exists, being you said a jewelry store? Or
No, it was a drugstore below.
Yeah,
I think a lady by the name of
McKim, yes. M-C-K-I-M.
Was headed as a drugstore for many years. In my day, it was a storehouse for the Van de Voort.
Hardware store.
No, the general store.
Oh, the general store.
Yeah, the brick building.
That's before Van de Voort's moved to Kingston, become the Van de Voort Hardware in Laura Princess. They started here in Napanee, or in Newburgh.
They started in Newburgh, then they went to Napanee, and then Kingston.
Kingston, yes.
Okay. That is fantastic. Can we have a warm round of applause for Allan? Thank you. So we're going to change gears. We're going to talk about the old telephone system in Newburgh. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice, mistakenly thought, wouldn't it be nice if I sang a telephone-related song? And I ran through a number of them in my head and came up with this one by a fellow from St. Louis, Missouri.
Long distance information, get me Memphis, Tennessee. Try to find the party, try to get in touch with me. She did not leave a number, but I know who placed the call, 'cause my uncle took the message and he wrote it on the wall.
So, long distance information. So that takes us back to a time, because you don't pick up the phone and say long distance information, get me Memphis, Tennessee anymore. But a while back in Newburgh, we had our own exchange and our own telephone company. And Bev, can you take us off on that journey?
Okay. Well, I worked there after I left Napanee, Bell, and Lou was the operator. It
Lou
was in-
Smith?
Yeah, Lou Smith.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. And it was in her house, which at one time was the Temperance Hotel, right? It depended on him. And anyway, it just had two boards, the same, the heavy headset that you wore. And sorry.
So when the call came in, what did you have to do?
Well, you take a cord, there's two cords together, like in each, and then you take the back cord, plug it in.
Yep.
Number please, and they tell you what number, and you take the front cord and put it in that, and they're connected. In the days, Lou would contact the firemen when there was a fire. I think we talked about that last time. And then after, I don't know, maybe a year or two, then Alice King, she would call Alice Milligan, and she would come over and ring the church bell. Not too much got past Lou. If I phoned and and asked for Betty Ann's number, she would say, "Oh, she's not here. She's not home, Bev. She's gone Napanee." Okay, thanks. Yeah. She was well liked, and everything was old. The board was old and that, but it worked.
The old booth, the old telephone booth.
The old telephone booth, yeah.
That was something
That was
else.
outside, yep,
Outside the door.
yep,
Yep.
yep,
You'd stick your head in and tell her who you wanted.
yep.
And then you'd go in this old rickety next to outhouse telephone booth.
Yep.
And if I can recall, back in the days of a school dance would be on, and he'd walk up to the telephone office. We had a phone, but I was embarrassed to use that, so I'd go down to Lou's and I'd say, "Lou, get me
Some girl.
some girl." And she'd say, "She's going to the dance with so-and-so, but somebody else is available. Want me to try her?" Lou would find you a date.
Yep. She didn't miss anything. She didn't miss anything. She was so good, so good. And then when they closed down, and I don't know what year it was, Dunville bought it, and that was moved up to the where the Masonic Lodge was.
Downstairs. Downstairs?
Pardon?
Downstairs or upstairs?
Downstairs.
Downstairs.
Right in the front.
Right in the front window.
South window.
Yeah, yeah. And I worked there too until Bell bought them out, and I forget what year, it must have been in the late 60s, 70s, Ben? maybe later.
Yeah, later.
Later, I
maybe.
think, maybe
Yeah.
late 70s,
Yeah.
when Bell bought that out. That ended the phone offices in Newburgh, so.
So Bev, before Dunville bought it, was it called the Newburgh Telephone Company or?
Yeah.
Perry.
Perry's.
Perry.
Perry's?
Yeah.
It was from Offistown originally. They owned the telephone system in Offistown.
Yeah.
And Lou and her brother, I think,
Yeah.
he did all the maintenance.
He was maintenance.
And Lou was the Newburgh operator, and I guess maybe the Perry guy's wife maybe did.
Yeah, she
did.
I forget
At
her name.
Offistown.
Yeah, she used to come and help too.
How did long distance work?
Pardon?
I remember when we moved here, I think it was long distance in Napanee, and then at some point we got a choice, Napanee or Kingston. I think they opened up Kingston.
I'll just,
Napanee.
I'll repeat that. So the question is, how did long distance work? Because when Grant moved here, it was long distance to Napanee, and they were given a choice. Well, listen, we're going to make one of them not long distance. Is that right? So you can phone Napanee, but if you're phoning Kingston, it's long distance.
So when you phone Kingston, you give them the number you want. There's a piece of paper and little square thing here with a handle on it.
Okay.
You put the paper in when they start talking, and you push it back, and then you watch your lights. And when they're finished, you pull the handle back, and that gives the time that they're billed for the call, for the long distance call. That answer you?
Yeah, I don't remember talking to anybody. Maybe Bell was here by 1975, 6.
I don't
Could be, I don't know.
know, Grant.
Because I can remember that, in fact, when I started practicing law here, the Kingston was long distance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
oh yeah, for sure. But that's the way you were charged with that. They had slips of paper with, like
Remember how party
Kingston.
lines work?
Party
Question
line,
is,
yeah.
can you tell us how the party lines work with the
Yeah,
ring
it's the same
system?
thing. You put your cords in, and one party line would be one long ring and two short, and that connects them. But the same number, if it's another party line, it's two long rings and one short. Or that's how it was ciphered.
And how many on a party? What made a party in Newburgh?
Probably 3 or 4.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid picking up the telephone and there'd be people talking.
Sure, and you'd listen. No. Yeah. Yeah, you could, if you picked it up, yeah, you would hear them. Yeah. Yeah.
Our old phone number is 11 ring 13.
1 3, 1 long, 3 short.
And so speaking of the rings though, what about actual telephone numbers? Would you have like 3431?
Our number was 20, ring 13. So so you would plug into the 20.
Yeah.
And then 1 long, 3 short.
Okay. Any other telephone questions? Just phone them in and like I'm phoning in this performance. Let's move on to another fascinating topic, the post office. So, Ben, first memories of the post office in town and where it was at that point.
In my day, it was Donna's antique shop, and we would go in there in the evenings in the fall when it started getting cold. Had nice hardwood floor in the waiting room, and you could play marbles. We'd play marbles in there from maybe 6. But Lena Madden was the postmistress forever, and she would come up at 7 o'clock to lock the door, and she would come in and she'd say, "Game over, boys, now you've got to leave because I'm going to lock the door." So we'd pick up our marbles and away we'd go. Find something else to do. I would have been 8, 10 years old, I suppose, and I just was across the street, so.
And Lena just lived across the street here. She was
Just
Bird
right
Joyce's
there,
sister.
Yeah, yeah.
And
But
then
she was forever. I don't know how many years she served.
Oh, yeah, she was
Years,
years.
years.
And then Alice came in,
Allan Hamilton, yeah.
helped her,
Yeah.
and took
Yeah.
over.
And then Marjorie.
And then Marjorie Roundhill
Yeah.
took over.
It was a long-standing job. Each of the operators were
Oh, yeah.
long-time employees.
And how often would the mail come in?
Every day except the weekend, except on Sunday. And it came by Wager coach lines, which originated in Tweed, came to Tamworth, picked up mail there, and over to Enterprise, Moscow, Yarker, Colebrook, down to Camden East, Newburgh. And each of those places had offices, and mail was distributed from those offices to rural carriers who took it out into the country. And then that bus went on through to Napanee with mail and passengers and school kids, and ended up in Kingston probably by 9:30 or so in the morning. And old Claire Hanna owned it, operated it, and he would stay all day in Kingston. And then at about 3 in the afternoon, he would strike back and return the route. And he also brought the newspaper from Kingston with him in the afternoon run. And you got your Week Standard from the post office at that time.
You met Claire Wager, didn't you?
Claire, did I say?
You said Claire Hanna.
Yeah, Claire Wager. Claire Wager, yeah, it was Wager. Claire was, and now Claire Hanna eventually took over some of the big routes, and he sold out to Coach Canada, I think, eventually, and it's now an operation, big. But they don't do mail. I don't think they draw mail, do they?
No.
No, just passenger.
And when did that move, like in 67, to the new post office, or did it?
You're saying 67?
Well, I'm just saying 67 because of the centennial display on the post office.
Yeah, I don't know when
I-
it was before that, I thought.
Well, yeah, it could be.
I don't know, Ben. Yes, I think it was, because
Yeah, he said there wasn't room, there was too much congestion of traffic on the main street.
Well, that, the old post office was there, we moved here in 66.
the new one,
Was it? The old one?
No,
It was
the
still
old one.
functioning. When was that, Teresa?
66.
Yeah.
66, the old one.
Oh, Dave, you might be
No,
right. It might have
maybe.
been
Might be
centennial, I don't know. Probably a centennial project.
sounds all right to me.
Yeah. We'll go along with that one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move from the post office to the railways. So, now, were the two ever connected? Was there a mail train, or was it always coaches that...
Freight with a car on the back end to draw passengers
Yeah.
in my day. Prior to that, the train came from, I guess maybe one of the trains originated in Deseronto, and it was owned by the Rathburn Lumber Company. And they had a line out through this area and swung north, Yarker and Enterprise, and back into the, at that time, timber country. And they hauled logs out of there by train after the river drivers gave up their operation. But my mother tells of going to school in Newburgh, and that would have been probably in the early 1900s, standing on the bridge down at the foot of the hill watching the river drivers drive logs down through the river. And then I guess the water got so low that they couldn't do that anymore, and they started hauling on by train. But the passenger train that went through here, eventually there was a passenger train went through, and it went through to Yarker and easterly to Newburgh, and right on down through Forfire and into Ottawa. And I think it was a daily run. I think it went early morning and back in the evening from Ottawa to Napanee. And we always laugh at Woody. When Woody first came here, he was an Air Force personnel, and after the war he took a mechanics course and he buddied up with Gervais McCune, another chap that had gone through the war, and Gervais and Woody were mechanics, and they opened the Newburgh repair shop at the foot of the hill. And that would have been about 1946 possibly. And Woody always tells the story that he had never been to Newburgh, and he came on the train he lived near Forfire, and he came up on the train in the middle of the night, or late at night, and got off in the station in Newburgh, and it was cold, really cold, and nobody was there to meet him, and he said if there had been a train going back, he'd have been on it, but he didn't have a choice. They were all up at her mom and dad's place, big party going on. They forgot to go down to meet the train to get Woody off the train. He lived a livelihood and raised a big family, and was a long-time fire department member, and just a round good guy.
Yep.
But the trains used to run straight through the center of the village, and if you know where Greg Parr built his new house, they ran right in that area. The track, you can still see the outline of the track down there. And from Strathcona to that area wasn't too bad for grade, but as we went through Newburgh and started up toward Camden East, it was all up grade. So they had to keep an old engine fired up all the time, and it sat down near where Bev's folks had the card brush factory. It sat in that area, and it was always fired up and ready to hook on and push the train up the grade. And the kids that skated, we had no rink, and this is before my time, but my dad tells stories of they would be skating on the river, and they'd run over and get in the old engine because it was nice and warm in there to get warmed up to play shinny on the river. And then in 1914, they saw fit to change the tracks to what is now the trail up here, behind the school and across the intersection and up through past Jack Harrison's farm, joined back into the main line on the other side of Camden East. And that was done in 1914, and the old, as we called it, the subway that was just past where Bev lives, that was built in 1914 and just torn down in the last 10 years maybe, or
It's up to Brendan Don's.
yeah, the actual bridge was taken off the piers, and Donnie and Brenda, your daughter, had it put across the creek that was in their property so they could have access to where they built their new home. Same bridge.
Yep.
The Halloween Bridge.
The Halloween
that's
Bridge.
it. Yep.
I can remember when I was a kid, the tracks were up on that end of the area, and the subway was right in front of my uncle and aunt Ed O'Connor's farm. And we'd play up on the old subway, and we'd take a grain bag and we'd fill it full of straw, and we'd drop it down, tie a rope on it, and we'd drop it down in the road, and somebody'd come along with a car, and the brakes would go on, and they'd back up. By that time, we'd hauled it up and underneath the subway, and that was our whole day's activity to bug somebody. Yeah. Didn't take much to entertain you in those days. Didn't have to have a computer.
You got more?
No, not really.
Well, the only thing I found was in this book here. I don't know too much about the railroad. Ben knows more. What I found was the Grand Trunk Railway en route to Kingston from Napanee passed south of the village. That would be what you were talking about. And that didn't work. So a railroad from Napanee, Tamworth, and Quebec Railway passed through in 1884.
Through here.
Yeah. So what I remember about the rail going up where the Cataract Way Trail is was he was talking about Woody. They lived on the north end side of the tracks, and when the train was coming through, probably about 8 o'clock at night, the kids, Woody's kids, had flashlights, and they'd go out and flash them at the train, and the guy that was in the caboose, he would swing his lantern back at them again. That went on. That was good. And there was usually if the firemen were if our boys were at a fire meeting, Helen would call me and say, come on up for a cup of tea. But be careful, it's time for a train to go through, so that was the main goal. So I always had to stop there and make sure I got across safely. So that's about all I know about the trains.
And were there enough trains, like while you were in school, that it was an event when the trains went by behind the...
behind the school, yeah.
If we're out in the play yard, you'd always run to the fence.
Yeah, if we were
Wave
up
at
in
the train.
the baseball diamond, it was right along there.
Did they stop in Newburgh and pick up?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and my mother came from Napanee, and when she wanted to go and visit her parents in Napanee, she got on the train, rode to Napanee, and then Dad, after work, came in the car and brought her home. But she did ride the train to Napanee.
My sister rode the train to high school in Napanee after she finished her schooling up here. She took a secretary course, I guess, or something in Napanee. And that would have been, Marge was born in 1910, so probably that would be 1930 possibly. And they rode the train back and forth to school, morning and night. And that train continued out through to Yarker, and then it went north to Enterprise.
Didn't Ford Fenwick ride the train?
Ford, yeah.
And
Ford,
some others?
Yeah, Ford was a mechanic, and he used to love to get up in the engine, help drive the train.
Well, didn't they let him pull it over on a siding or something?
Oh, yeah.
He was just a kid.
In Yarker, you could go through a Y system there and divert the train onto a line that went around across through to the Pick and Push line, which was the Kingston Pembroke line, into Kingston. You could go to Kingston that way too.
Yeah.
Ken.
The train station.
The train station, I'm going to repeat this, Ken. So there were sort of two areas, right?
The
older
downtown one
train.
where Barry Butler lives now.
Yeah.
But then the new one was up along where the cat trail, just in there. And
between Main Street and, what's that, East Street, the school?
East, the school, between there.
Between the two of them, right along there on the south side of the track.
Yeah.
There was a big freight shed there for, they push cars over in on the siding there and unload freight. The car might stay there for 2 or 3 days to be unloaded.
Didn't they load cattle from there too?
Yeah, cattle were shipped. My dad used to ship cattle from there to Toronto. And different drovers, cattle drovers in the area would ship carloads of cattle from there. They were weighed in little weigh scales there and loaded on cars and sent to Toronto.
And I think Card Brush took their packages up.
Yep, everything was shipped by train at that time.
Yep.
I built my home in 1959, and I bought an oil tank through McKillen Wood for my heating. And I had it for probably 40 or more years. And when I tore the tank out of it, it was McKillen Wood CNR written on, on the car, on the tank. So it had been shipped by train from someplace. Trains were mainly the only source of transportation, I guess, basically for any distances, was either that or horse. When Finkel had a carriage works here in the village, and back around the turn of the century, my dad used to drive for them once in a while, and you drove a team to Odessa, changed horses there, and you drove another team into Kingston from Odessa. And there was a stagecoach and of some nature, I'm not sure what. Maybe like the old Wild West, I don't recall. But then you had your horses and you brought them back to Odessa and switched horses again and came to Newburgh, and it was sort of an all-day deal, I guess. But that was a way of getting to Kingston in the early 1900s or pre-1900s. Weren't very many cars.
So I have one more quick topic before we adjourn, which is, Ken, the church that was moved up to your place. And Bev, you can tell us a little bit about that?
I talked to Don, and he remembers Warren telling him about that. It was moved. Now, he wasn't sure if it was moved fully or if it had been torn down. But it's the barn at your place.
Yeah.
And Warren told him that it was brought to their property and the barn was built, and there was people come often to look at it from there.
And where was it in the village?
In the village.
Where did it come from?
Before it was moved?
It was the Switcherville church.
But it came straight from Switcherville up to the farm?
Yes. That's what I understand now.
Okay. I knew originally it was Switcherville, but then I thought that it was in Newburgh for a warehouse or something and then brought up.
Well, Don didn't say anything about that.
That's great.
I don't know.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. Thanks again, Bill. Thank you, Donna Poirier, for making this happen. And thank you to our guests, Bev and Ben and Allan.